Here we go. The first ever in-person 2 Bi Guys. Are you ready for this?
Is the world ready for this? You're going to end up cutting this part out.
Maybe I'll use it. You never know. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to 2 Bi Guys. I am Rob. This is part 1 of a 2-part season finale. We're going to 11 episodes this year with the election special. First time we've done 11 instead of 10. Hope you enjoy it. It stresses me out to have the odd number, but we had to do it. Coming up in a few minutes is a lovely interview with my friend Aaron Hammersley. He works at Disney and he recently wrote a guide for authentic bi representation in storytelling, in film and TV primarily. We did an in-person interview at my apartment, so the energy is pretty fun. I hope you enjoy it. Unfortunately, the sound is not perfect due to the way that we recorded it with one microphone, but you can still hear everything we said. It's not too bad. And I did say in that intro that you just heard, and I think I repeated again, that it's the first time we've ever done an in-person interview. I totally forgot that we started this podcast in person when Alex and I began in season 1 in 2019. We intended to do this all in person, and then the pandemic hit and it became all virtual, and I started using Zencaster. It's kind of hard to remember those pre-pandemic days. So I guess it's not technically the very first in-person interview, but it's the first of the new era. It's the first in-person interview of 2 Bi Guys by 1 Bi Guy, certainly. So I hope you guys enjoy that. Before we get there, obviously there was an election recently, if you didn't hear. If you listen to this podcast, it clearly did not go the way that I was hoping, and probably not the way many of you were hoping. I was very surprised, to be honest. I didn't think it would turn out this way. And I stand by everything I said in that podcast episode and on social media. I am worried about what could happen. Bad things are going to happen. I wish it were the other way around. It remains to be seen how bad things will get. Maybe it will just be a little bit bad. Maybe it will be really terribly catastrophic. I hope that it is not the latter, but either way, it's up to us to resist and to fight and to show people that the policies that he's put out are not what most people want. I have listened to 100 takes about why he won, and a lot of it makes sense, and I get a lot of what is going on in the world and why this is happening. And this is not a podcast about politics, so I'm not going to get into all that, but it is definitely true that a lot of the policies he ran on are not popular, and it's up to us to find those connections with other people who oppose these policies and reach out to these people and be clear about what's going on, because there is so much disinformation out there. Possibly more on that in the future, but again, that's not the focus of this podcast. There are many other podcasts for that. I encourage you to listen to them and to stay engaged. I definitely have felt like tapping out, and take the time you need for self-care and don't jump into it right away. I definitely may tap out here and there to take care of myself, as I did last week when I failed to edit this podcast episode. But I'm also invigorated and re-energized to continue the fight and continue the resistance. As RJ and I said in that episode, regardless of who wins, there is work to be done, and we'll just see what type of work it is. So now we kind of know what type of work it is, so we have to get to it. The only other thing I'll say is about the importance of community right now. If you are interested in being politically engaged, there are lots of great political organizations and communities to get involved in. I am a member of SURGE, which stands for Showing Up for Racial Justice. I did some pre-election work with them. It's a great organization that I'll throw out there. I've also been involved with DSA in the past, and though I kind of fell off a little bit recently, I have renewed energy to get involved with DSA. And whatever organization or community you align with, go join, do in-person community. And then especially for everyone listening to this podcast, queer community is going to be so important always, but for the next 4 years especially. Queerness is a gift. Queer community will help sustain us through this and will help us protect each other through this. If you've been involved in in-person queer community in the past, stay engaged. And if you have not, now is the time to join. I am not telling people to come out if you're not ready, especially in this political climate. That is a choice that only you can make. And you should only do it if you feel safe to do it. And there may be many reasons that are coming that it may not be safe to do it. But if you do feel safe, I encourage you to join queer community. This is the antidote to the despair, or at least one of the antidotes to the despair we may be feeling. And it is so important to nurture your soul and remember who you are as fascism comes into power and as disinformation festers and as anti-trans and anti-queer sentiment spreads and is used against us politically. We need to remember that we're here, we exist, we're valid, and not only valid, but beautiful. And we have so much to teach the world, and we need to continue sharing our stories. A lot of the disinformation in the election about us is just not what our community is. And these ads that ran all over the country are misrepresenting us. And so it's really important now that we tell our stories, and that if we're safe to do so, we are visible. So I'm going to continue doing that on this podcast, and in-person queer community is really valuable to feel normal, valid, accepted, and the next level, that queerness is an amazing, special thing that is healing, that I do believe is part of what can heal the world. If we share ourselves authentically, if we lead with love. Many of us have been through so much and learned so much along the way, and the empathy that we can have for other people is a really powerful force that we will need now more than ever. And of course, through all that, take care of yourselves, practice self-care, take care of your mental health, go to support groups, go to therapy, meditate, do yoga, whatever works for you. One thing that has been working for me lately is Magic Mind. I mentioned it in the last episode. I've now been using it for a few weeks. It turns out to be good timing. Magic Mind has definitely been helping with my mental health and helping me to stay smooth and calm through all of this. If you're having one of those days where you just need a bit of a boost, but you don't want to be constantly drinking coffee all day and get those jitters and that anxiety that comes with it, Magic Mind is really helpful for that. I've been using it for 3 or 4 weeks now. It's really like smoothed out my mood. It's allowed me to get into flow states where I'm creatively engaged and doing the work I need to do. I've also been cutting down on coffee lately, and the Magic Mind has really helped me ease into that. It is not a coffee replacement, but it does help you have less coffee through the day, and it helps time release the caffeine so that you don't need so many cups continuously throughout the day, but so that that 1 or 2 cups in the morning can spread itself out over the day and just keep you energized, but in a nice and smooth way. Magic Mind is basically a mental performance shot. It's a small little green capsule. I really like the taste. It has mushroom nootropics and adaptogens, plus over 100% of your daily vitamin C and D per bottle. Their mushrooms are organically grown in California. We love mushrooms. We love California. And they're sold in Sprouts and Central Market and Erewhon. And if you live in LA, you know how fancy something is if it's sold in Erewhon. So it must be good. There's no risk. They're so confident in what they've built that they'll refund you 100%, no questions asked, for 100 days after buying. And I really like it. I recommend it. It's definitely helped me through this period, and in general just helps smooth my mood and feel good all day without so much coffee. So if you're interested, you have a limited offer you can use now that gets you up to 48% off your first subscription, or 20% off a one-time purchase with the code 2BIGUYS20 at checkout. That's TWOBIGUIS 20 at checkout. We'll put the link in the show notes, but you can also claim it at magicmind.com/2byguys20. So check it out. I highly recommend. In addition, for your mental health, like I said, support groups by request and by, there are lots of options. I recommend them. Group coaching is also available with me. You can check out my website, robertbrookscohen.com/coaching for info and dates on group coaching. And individual coaching, I do have a couple slots available. I'm working with a bunch of clients. It's going really well, but I always have slots available. Not to use the new administration to sell coaching, but he promised the economy will be better and the stock market is up, but his stances on social issues are backwards and will cause a lot of people stress. So it's a era of more money but more problems. So perfect combo for coaching. So why not sign up for coaching with me? But seriously, whatever you need to do to take care of yourself, now is the time to do it, because come the new year, we need to be ready to take on whatever is coming our way and take care of each other. So now coming up is my interview with Aaron Hammersley. We talked about bi representation in film and TV. Although in this first part of the interview that is in this episode today, we talked a lot about Aaron's journey and his story. We got deep into it. His story is really interesting, and the way he got into the work he's doing is fascinating. And then towards the end of this episode, we start to get into the actual guide that he wrote with some of his recommendations, but then the majority of the deep dive into the guide will be in next week's episode. So stay tuned for that. Or if you're listening on Patreon, then you get the whole thing right now. Check out patreon.com/RobertBrooksCohen for early access, full video episodes, and some other bonus content here and there when I have it. And with that, here is the interview. Enjoy. Okay. Hello.
Hey.
Hello, everybody. Hi, Aaron. Welcome to a new experiment on Two Bi Guys. We're back. This is our two-part season finale, probably. Maybe not. Things can change, but
News to me.
It might be the end of our season. It's coming up on that. Welcome to Two Bi Guys, the first ever in-person Two Bi Guys. We're seeing how this goes. We're recording at a table. If you're watching on Patreon, you can see us here. Look how my hand goes across and he can touch it. We can touch each other. Oh, so lovely. Welcome finally to Two Bi Guys, my friend Aaron Hammersley. Welcome.
Thank you. It's so nice to be here finally.
Yes, and I'm glad we could do this little experiment in person. And we live down the street from each other. So
I know, and have for many years now.
Yeah, yes. And yet this is the first time you're here in my space. Welcome.
It's true.
Yeah.
Thank you. It's a great space.
We were gonna do this podcast from the hot tub at my complex.
That's true.
And which I thought was an amazing idea, but Aaron didn't want to.
No, that's not. I just felt like maybe the sound would be problematic with all the bubbles.
Yeah, probably. And all the other people who
the other people in the hot tub. Yeah.
Might be distracting slightly.
Yeah.
I don't know if we all want to talk about bi representation in film and
I think it could have ended up being a little bit of a group discussion.
Someday that would be an interesting episode. Maybe
It's just you and I just sitting in a hot tub talking to random people who come in and out of the hot tub.
I don't hate that idea for a spin-off
podcast. This is our spin-off podcast.
It can be called 8 Bi Guys in a hot tub. 8 Bi Guys in a hot tub. So why are you here, Aaron? Let's tell people about you, because they might not know. And so Aaron Hammersley, who uses any and all pronouns, really? Any and all pronouns?
Yeah, that's a long story, but basically I don't have a relationship with my own gender identity. So cool. I kind of just,
We'll get into that. I want to ask you about that. Aaron Hammersley is a filmmaker and production manager currently at Disney, right down the street. I used to picket outside and he would wave.
Yeah, we'd hug each other across the picket lines. It was great.
There's
just love between unions and studios. Yeah.
Yes. But over his 16 years in the industry, he has worked for every major studio and has worked with 75% of all celebrities, according to him. Now he says it's 80%. We'll have to I'm going to audit you on those statistics.
Okay.
We'll do a little test later. He is on the board of the LA Bi Plus Task Force. He, like RJ, is RJ on the board also? Our bi stepfather on the show?
I don't think so.
Oh, okay.
But
he just does stuff. Sometimes.
He does all kinds of stuff for all kinds of bad.
So you're actually way more important than RJ.
No, that's not true. We're all equals in our fights.
Okay, fine.
Yeah.
But you're on the board of the LA Bi Task Force. Aaron is an outspoken advocate for the LGBTQ plus community, working especially for more inclusive representation in front of and behind the camera. In 2024, he co-authored Rewrite the Bylines, Bi Narratives, a guide to authentic representation in storytelling, the first comprehensive guide to portraying bi characters in film and television. I also wrote that he currently resides in Los Angeles, which we already discussed, since
I
that's where
do.
we are. And so welcome to Two Bi Guys.
So great to be two bi guys in the same room.
You're the second bi guy for today.
Oh, love it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You were bi before me though, probably.
Maybe I don't know. We'll have to talk about that. We'll have to figure that out.
Tell me about it. Let's talk about it right now. Tell
Okay.
me about like yeah. So like also I'll just say we are friends. We know each other.
Yes,
You want to
we
say how we
have for
met?
several years. Where did we meet officially? We met at some bi
And
event at some point, probably Ambi.
probably am
Shout
by.
out to Ambi.
I don't remember exactly
I
what
don't remember
where
exactly
what.
which event it was, but
Yeah.
maybe
So
there was a hot tub involved. I don't know.
maybe
But
a still bisexual thing. I remembered meeting you at Pride, maybe, or we
yes,
might have met
multiple
before
times.
that.
I think
That's
we
when we
met
got the shirt.
before Pride, but Pride is like where we talked more and
Hmm.
maybe became friends. Yeah,
Oh, are you considering us friends?
I consider
Okay.
us friends.
Okay.
Yeah,
Good. Me
even though
checking.
you've never
Just checking.
invited me over to your home, but now you have, so it's okay. Now we're friends
I
officially.
well, if I invite you to my home for business, it counts as
Yes,
it
yes,
spills over
that's
into
right.
friendship.
We have had many a fun hangout outside of either of our apartments.
Yes, true. Okay, cool. So tell us a little about your journey. I am curious, actually, if you were bi before me.
Oh yeah.
I think you probably were, from what I know. But
Oh,
when
okay.
did you kind of realize it, and what's your journey been?
Yeah. So I think a lot of the way that I sort of characterize my childhood and my discovery of that part of myself is that I felt like an alien for most of my life. I still really
Mm,
very much do, but
we all
I
are.
remember like going through adolescence, right? Probably like we always did, and this was in the '90s, so it was still, in my opinion, the most homophobic decade of human history.
Mm,
I think uh, having these like realizing that I was having all these attractions to different kinds of people, and especially
yeah.
having when I was starting to go through that process, we moved into a more white-facing, affluent part of the country, and it was a very different experience for me because I we were poor and I'd come from a small town and we were still not wealthy, and
Mm,
the experience I had was just being around a lot of like rich white people basically who had like a very different experience of the world than I did. And so I felt like an outside in that regard. And then at the same time, I was like, wait, why am I attracted to like all these dudes and also these like women at the same time? And unfortunately, and one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about representation in film and television is that I grew up very passionately watching a lot of film and TV. It's sort of naturally led to me being in this industry.
mm,
But I will always tell people that I never heard the word bisexual until I was 19 years old,
mm.
and it was in a terrible. It's a terrible example, but anyway, it was a
Well,
joke about
uh-huh,
like being bisexual is not real.
uh-huh.
But I
On
remember hearing
TV,
that and
something
being
on TV, or in
no, it
real
was a
life?
movie. It's a
Okay.
movie called now it's going to escape me. Jeffrey
Okay.
with Patrick Stewart. Anyway, um, but I was intrigued by the word basically, and I thought, oh, that's interesting. What's that? And when I was a freshman in college, this word kind of stuck with me, and I was like, wait, that you like can be attracted to both. And during that time, I was having a very fluid experience sexually where like I'd be attracted to like women more like one week, and then the next week I would be attracted to like men more and like
Uh,
be more interested in exploring that. And it was also the first time in my life because it was college and people were more open about being themselves to some degree.
uh,
They would. I started having gay friends for the first time, and unfortunately, my gay friends at that time period were extremely, and this is not going to surprise you at all, very negative towards me saying that I was bi and that
what?
I liked women and all of these things. And
Gay
I,
people being
I mean, to
biphobic?
this day, years and
That's
years later,
shocking.
like I know, shocking. To this day, years and years later, like it's the same narratives as we know, right?
Yeah.
Like there are so many women I've dated that are like, are you just gay or like are you gonna cheat on me? There's so many men, gay men that I've dated that have wondered that. But anyway, because of that experience in college, I stopped trying to come out, basically.
Uh-huh.
Um, and
Mm.
for a lot of other reasons, I just decided to be straight
Uh-huh.
for most of my 20s.
Mm.
And then when I was 29, I fell in love with my best friend, who was a man, and
Mm.
he was a gay man. And we ended up falling in love, and we were in a 7-year relationship together before it ended. And that was when I had to come out,
Uh-huh.
because it forced my hand in terms of believing that some part of me was wrong, or like some part of me was like the gay side of me was just because of something or
Yeah.
whatever, and that it was just sexual, and that that attraction meant nothing beyond physicality or whatever you want to say.
Yeah.
And at
Yeah.
that point, I was like, wait, I have now been in love with 2 women. By the time I was 29, I'd been in love with 2 women, and I was in love with this guy, and I was like, oh, and I'm still attracted to all these different kinds of people, and that's only expanded since. But
Interesting.
when I was 29, I came out to my family. I came out to a lot of my friends and sort of lived that way. And then after a
You
lot
came
of
out at the beginning of that relationship, or
essentially,
towards
yeah,
the
towards
beginning?
the beginning of that relationship,
Was
and
it surprising to you that, because I identify with the like, oh, my attractions to men are more sexual and not as important, and I want to
yeah,
do that, but it's not how I'm going to live my life. And then I started falling in love and having emotional connections
yeah,
and going, oh, I guess that's possible too. Was that surprising to you that that
it
happened?
was. I mean, I think the way that society grooms us is it's probably still true, but not even like believing that the side of me that people were saying is gay was wrong, but it's just that my entire experience of like the way that same-sex attraction works for, people who are male, like it feels like it's very sexualized and physical, and it doesn't like there's not a
Mm,
lot of focus on like the beauty and the more spiritual, the more emotional like side of that.
yeah,
And again, I was like, I'm happy to just be with a woman and just like know that this is a thing in the back of my mind, but just like live as a straight person.
yeah,
It's quite frankly easier, even though on the inside you're being crushed like in your
yeah,
soul,
yeah,
like it's hurting you, and you're hurting yourself by not expressing who you are.
yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it was, having my hand forced by falling in love with a boy was, meaningful, and I would say he's one of the few gay men I've ever met or been with that was totally fine with it. He is one of those gay
Good.
men that's totally grossed out by like women's like organs in general, to put it lightly, but just never questioned that I would cheat on him,
Uh,
never wondered whether or not we were real, never, thought that I was gonna like just run away with a
good.
woman or whatever. Like that he was not efficient enough for me or whatever you want to say.
Yeah, yeah. We love
So
that self confidence and non biphobia from the
I
gay
know.
community.
Well,
As much as
yeah,
there's stuff to complain about, there's, I think, a growing portion of the gay community, probably the majority, that like is getting it
I
more.
would like I would I
I hope
I'm
so.
hoping so. Yes, I will be optimistic with you. Yeah.
Both
But he was
exist. Both
definitely one of
definitely
those people.
exist. At least,
Yeah,
at
both
least we can
definitely
say that.
exist. Yeah. No, for sure.
Interesting. Okay, so then you were saying you came out to your family around 29, 30, which is around how old I was.
Yeah, yeah.
So
I mean,
probably
I think generally speaking we maybe
I wasn't,
probably
it seems like I wasn't as aware of it as you were younger. That you didn't come out, you kind of made a decision, sort of,
yes. No, I mean
that there
that's
was some
exactly what happened.
awareness.
Yeah, I mean, I would say uh, you know, given the way we grew up in the society we grew up with, that's still largely there. I think I actively made a decision to never talk about it
Uh-huh.
until I was in college, and then I had a
Yeah,
very tight group of friends in college that I tried to have that
yeah,
experience talking about it with, and
and
again,
it
then it
didn't
went
work.
badly. So I
Yeah,
was like, fine, it's fine. I'll just be straight. It's
yeah,
fine.
yeah,
Like,
yeah.
and then it,
I
backfired
see.
when I fell in love. But
And where'd you grow up? And then where'd you move to in the beginning of the story?
Northeast. I grew up all over the place. I like to tell people I moved 8 times before I graduated high school. Yeah.
Wow.
And
Fun.
but we ended up for high school. We ended up in this town called Chapel Hill, North Carolina, which
Where is it?
is where UNC Chapel Hill is. Tar Heels, Michael Jordan, etc.
Cool.
It's right by Duke
Cool.
University.
Yeah.
It's very affluent white. It's very segregated for the most part as a town. Like there's just definitely income driven segregation.
Interesting.
Yeah, a lot of rich kids.
And why are you wearing a Boston Red Sox hat?
Because I love Go Sox.
Why do you like Boston?
I love Boston.
Just for fun?
I've always loved Boston. You know, growing up outside, I wasn't a New Yorker in that sense.
But you were
like
up
I
there.
wasn't a
Were you
Yankees
a New
fan.
Englander?
Yeah.
Okay.
We grew up. I grew up Pennsylvania, New York. Yeah.
Okay.
Virginia.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right. Fair enough.
DC. Yeah.
Okay, so then you came out to your family.
Yes.
And then what? How did you this became a bigger part of your life at some point?
Yeah. So I came out to my family. That's a whole side story, but let's say that went about as well as it goes for any bi person with family members that just don't. I actually have to say that my father surprisingly was very open about it. Like he wasn't. I'm not saying he particularly understands from a knowledge perspective what that experience has been like for me, but sort of randomly one time at dinner, my ex and I were sitting together with him, and my mom went to the restroom, and he just like turned to me and he was like, I just want you to know that I don't care who you end up with as long as you're happy and you're in love with that person.
Oh.
And I was like, that's like a really sincere way of my dad being like, I accept you, essentially. And he came from a very small, very like ultra toxic masculine town in upstate Pennsylvania. And, you know, it was just not what you expect from my father. My mother to this day has been more complicated to deal with.
Yeah.
You know, she's still living in, I don't know, like her liberal fantasy that she has like a gay son and wants me to be her BFF. I don't know. It's a very strange psychosis, to say the least.
I don't know if that sounds good or bad.
Yeah, I don't know. I remember when I came out to her, we were in the car. This is such a visual memory. So it was the day after my 29th birthday, and we're in the car driving down the 101 South on our way to Disneyland. And I said, Mom, there's something I need to tell you. And I said, I am not just attracted to women. I'm attracted to, you know, I have the potential to be attracted to everyone. And her first response was, I think that's going to be hard.
Yeah.
Which maybe was from a loving motherly place, but that's kind of what the narrative has been.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's common. I would say I had a similar thing with my parents. Like my dad was pretty, you know, very understanding and accepting right away. And my mom was like supportive, but had questions. Yeah. And she didn't say that's going to be hard, but the questions that she had right away implied that that's going to make things harder. Yeah. And that like, oh, now we have to figure other stuff out. Are you going to still have a family? And what's that? Right. You know, what does this mean for your life? And people, I think that, that it's a common thing of like hearing that and thinking, hey, your life has been harder than I thought it was. And that brings up sadness for some people. And also it will be harder too. I don't know what.
She's still struggling with that too, because she's one of those people that feels like it's a failure of her as a mother if my sister and I have had like a bad experience or whatever, which I think is true for a lot of mothers. I think in her case, she is at a loss for the responsibility that is on her. But I also think circumstantially, very soon after that, I got into a 7-year relationship with my ex. And I think that for her in her mind was like, oh, he's just gay, but he's unwilling to say it. To which I say, in what universe is it easier to be bi than it is to be a gay man? I don't know. I don't understand that whole narrative, but somebody made that shit up.
it's a very common assumption that I think people who listen to this podcast probably will understand
Yeah,
the
it is,
reality
yeah.
of like how complicated and it is to be bi and how biphobia may be more invisible, but it is as pervasive, if not more so,
Oh,
and
yeah.
it's a little more insidious in a way, in that
Oh,
it's
yeah.
sometimes not as direct, but it
Correct.
comes in ways you can't always see, and that can be insidious because
Yes.
you feel it without knowing what that is.
No, and we have to talk about the social insidious nature of biphobia and bi-erasure. But just to
Social
finish personal,
nature of
yes.
biphobia. Okay.
I yeah, so sorry. So anyway,
Yes, keep going.
about I don't know, timelines wise doesn't really matter, but several years ago, I finally found the right kind of therapy slash help, etc. And so I was able to heal from a lot of different kinds of trauma and strengthen my resolve in myself and all of those
Yeah.
wonderful things that happen when you really like lock in and you work on yourself.
Yeah.
So I did that really hardcore for a couple of years. And by the way, a lot of that trauma is not even related to being bi, but of course it's always informed. And coming out of that, I felt strongly, this is where my advocacy journey started, that as somebody who had healed and felt stronger as a person, that I needed to stand up for people that were experiencing the same things that I was,
Yeah.
or any version of,
Yeah.
the bi stuff.
And so then you started to become an advocate. Yeah. So
Correct.
when did that journey start, and what does that entail? And then we'll lead into the new stuff.
It essentially started as a Facebook post, to be honest. I had like a life coach at the time that was sort of pushing me to do more leadership stuff because he saw how much I cared about
Uh-huh.
other people, how empathetic I was, and how much I had done work to strengthen my ability to like stand up
Yeah.
for myself and things like that.
Yeah.
And so I ended up posting on Facebook at the time. Um, no, I
That
posted on
one's still
Facebook
Facebook's
about,
still there.
yeah, exactly.
It's
No, I
the
posted to Facebook, which you have to understand is just a like mass conglomeration for me of like random people I went to high school and colleges with, and like people I've worked with in the industry with, from so many different projects and from all over the United States. Just a crazy smattering of people. Some family members, anyway,
mm,
and I wrote a long post about the fact I just started it like I am bi, and then I wrote very briefly in like two sentences what that experience was like and how proud I was of myself now. And that was kind of like my, as we always talk about as bi people, like you come out so many different times. For me, that was me coming out as a stand for other people.
uh-huh.
And during the pandemic, which was not that long ago, even though it feels like ages, I chose to do a similar thing on IG,
Uh-huh.
and so
So the
I think at
Facebook
that
one was
point,
pre-pandemic,
no, I think it was
or
kind of right before the pandemic started, or
right
it might have
around
been
2020, right
right
around
when,
then.
yeah, social lockdown happened and
Uh-huh.
everything.
Uh-huh.
So that was kind of a good thing because then you get a lot of eyes on it.
Yeah.
It
So
might
you
have
were
been right
out
though.
among friends or family before that, but
Yeah,
that was when it became sort of like public.
yeah.
Yeah. And I feel like we didn't meet until after that. I feel like
No,
we
we
met
didn't.
post-pandemic,
Well, yeah, I think that's
right?
true. I think we met it.
We
Yeah,
must have,
we
because I
must
didn't
have.
do much AMBI before. Maybe I went to one or two things before
No,
the
I didn't
pandemic.
either.
Yeah.
I think I went to like one. I
So
was like,
you've done quite a lot in a few years in this space
oh,
in terms of the
okay.
activism then, right?
Yeah, I mean,
Pretty active in AMBI,
yes,
organizing, and then now the task force, and
yeah,
now this.
yeah. And I haven't not been an advocate for other things in my life. I grew up volunteering for Habitat for Humanity and at soup kitchens. I um, did a lot of survivor stuff with battered women's shelter
Oh,
and
I was
sexual
thinking,
abuse survivors
okay,
in my late 20s and 30s. So I was kind of already dipping a toe in it,
cool,
but
cool.
I just actually finally had the emotional skill set to do more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Such a mensch.
Ah, oh,
So much good
feels so
work.
good coming from a lovely
So
Jewish
much good
person
work.
like yourself.
When you said survivor, this is the weird thing, but like I used to work at Law and Order SVU, and we would
Of
use the
course,
term
yeah.
survivor a lot, and like we try not to use the term victim because it can feel blaming, and survivor is empowering, and that always that word was about that. And now I don't work there anymore, and over the past year or two, I've been getting really into the TV show Survivor, and so I
Oh,
thought now that's what Survivor is to me. And I
okay.
thought that you were talking about the game show Survivor.
And side note,
Uh,
Survivor is a strangely like queer leaning audience kind of a show. I'm not sure why, but like I used to go to this gay board gamers
uh-huh,
club
uh-huh.
and they were obsessed with Survivor.
Oh
And
my
I
God. Are you not obsessed with
I'm
Survivor?
not.
Can you
I'm
please get
sorry.
obsessed with it and we
I
can watch
mean,
it
I'll
together?
try
Because I am
again. We
obsessed
can
with
watch. I will watch anything with you
it. Okay.
because we're friends and I think it'd be fun.
Okay,
But
but also on this season
Survivor
of
obsessed.
Survivor is amazing. And there used to be people used to hide their queerness on Survivor
Oh
because
yeah,
they might have thought that would hurt them in the
right.
game.
But
Now it's almost the opposite. You need to
yeah,
be authentically yourself right away.
yeah.
Otherwise, people will find out later and know that you lied. And so, like, coming out or not on Survivor is a big, like, game decision now. And it's
Oh,
really
okay.
interesting. And
That is interesting. Well, isn't the famously the first season of Survivor wasn't it won by a gay man?
yeah, he's
Yeah,
gay. Yeah. And
yeah.
he came out quickly on his season, which I'm
Oh,
watching right now,
interesting.
because it was too soon to realize that, what that would mean.
Right.
But actually it worked out for him in that case. But then it happened where like queer people were kind of ganged up on sometimes, and if you were out, you were an outcast. And now it's swung back the other way.
Okay.
There is a guy currently on who came out as bi in the first episode and seemed like a terrible, terrible player. His name was Andy. He kind of like broke down crying, thinking that nobody liked him. And then everyone saw him as not a threat. And now he's survived multiple
Oh, of
votes
course.
and he's
Yeah.
doing well and he's playing better. And like, I'm kind of like,
Such an interesting social construct of the game.
yeah, it's fascinating. I mean, we could do a whole hour on Survivor, but we can't. Anyway, we'll see how Andy does. We might have the first pie winner ever, or
Maybe.
maybe there has been. I don't know. So you're doing lots of activism. You do lots of other
I'm
stuff.
trying.
It's really fun. It's
Isn't
great.
enough.
Guide Task Force, still bisexual. It isn't enough. You want?
No, I said isn't enough.
Is it?
I
enough?
don't know.
Is it enough?
I don't know.
What have you changed in society yet so far?
I don't know. I am proud to say that I got a text message from a friend of mine who was at a conference in London, and the writer that was holding the panel actually referenced
This tool.
this tool
Uh-huh.
as a necessary
Yeah.
part of writing, and that felt really good to me.
Yeah.
But I um, am someone who holds myself to a really high standard, and so I have been fighting at studios for
Yeah.
their DEI divisions to develop this tool as a commonplace,
Yeah.
available thing for the writers' rooms.
Yeah.
And that's more important to me because that changes the game behind the scenes.
Yeah.
Although, sometimes I think like shouting to the void about certain things has made certain TV shows like skew to like correct themselves in later seasons. I don't know that it's true, but I am shouting as loud as I can on behalf of our community.
Uh-huh.
And when that kind of stuff comes up, I'm like, okay, great. You know?
Has anything changed that you've seen during the course of a show because of fan?
Yeah, again, I cannot tell 100% where it comes from, and I can only tell you rumors that I've heard from people I know in our circles.
Uh-huh.
But there's a Will and Grace apology episode in the reboot of it that is entirely directed at how they treated bi people for the majority of that show.
Cool.
And it's a very self-aware apology, in my opinion.
Nice.
Also, Sex Education did a terrible job after having one of their characters come out as bi, is actually treating him as bi. In fact, they call him gay
Uh-huh.
for several seasons after that. But then all of a sudden, in the final season of the show, which is a mess, by the way. We talk about that in
Oh,
another
I
stream.
haven't
But
seen it.
anyway,
I heard that show is great, but
yeah,
okay.
I mean, I like a lot of things about the show, but in the last season, they like reconfirmed his sexuality again, which I felt like was, I hope, people reading or
Yeah.
educating themselves in the writers' room or whatever.
Yeah. Cool.
Because yeah,
Interesting.
I again can't confirm that that's true, but I hope
Interesting.
it. I believe that people can grow and change.
I
So
think so too. And
yeah,
I don't I haven't watched all of Sex and the City of either iteration, but I've seen a decent amount of both, and
yeah,
that would be an interesting
yeah.
revision.
I
I
have
know they
yeah,
dealt with bisexuality on the new version, and Miranda's bi and whatever, right? Like, is
yeah,
it
and I've
hard?
been told that it's. I haven't watched any of the new seasons. I've been told that they're still living in the not really great representation space.
Yeah. I
So
saw some of it and I was like, okay, it's cool she's bi, and they're kind of what I saw made sense,
yeah, yeah,
but I didn't see all of it, and I didn't get much from, I don't know. There was probably stuff missing, and I didn't hear much from the other characters, and I didn't hear any kind of anything about male bisexuality. Certainly,
no,
it was all just Miranda centric,
yeah,
which is good. I'm glad they're doing that. It's great. But
yeah,
well, we'll get into
yeah,
some
yeah, yeah.
specific examples in a minute.
Okay.
Before we dive into this tool, which is amazing
Oh
and
yeah,
very colorful, I printed a black and white version, and then you brought
I
me a
brought you
colorful
a
version,
color version. Yeah.
and I will use the
And
color.
shout out to a very dear friend of mine, Haley Kime, who I think because of being friends with me and seeing what I was doing in the world, actually discovered and then fell in love with the woman. So now she realized
Ooh,
that she's bi as well, which makes me really happy because
yay!
she's living her best life. But
That's
she's a
our.
designer and she did all the graphic design things. So
Oh, cool. Well,
yeah,
it looks very pretty, and it has the bicolors,
yeah,
which is appropriate. And that's our mission as bi advocates, right? Is to turn more people bi. Like,
right,
that's
exactly.
like, if
Yes,
we can get better representation, great. But if we
yeah,
start
yeah,
at the source of just like make more people bi,
yeah,
then it'll all trickle up,
yes.
right?
The amount of my friends who've like realized that they were bi, and I keep thinking, am I turning them bi? You start to have that conversation with yourself.
Yeah.
It's not actually true, but in your head, you're like, maybe I'm just happy to be the person that gave them the space to realize who they really are,
Whether
or to
it's
be
giving
open to
them
falling
this,
in love with somebody that they had never thought they would.
indeed, giving
Yeah,
them the space, giving them the emotional, space to explore that. We're also giving them a hand if they need to try something out.
yeah,
Like, I'm
exactly.
here to help.
Yeah,
Any curious quote straight guys out there, hit me up.
Rob, you
This is
hear that,
my
everyone?
mission.
Rob is the let me help you explore your sexuality for the first time if you're straight.
Call me up.
All bi curious. Well,
Please come. This is part of my mission. Please come. Literally.
yeah, there you
Please
go.
come.
Please come.
Please come with me.
Rob's here for you.
Okay. So before we actually dive into the tool, like,
Yes.
what's it like working at Disney or the other places you've worked as you've realized what needs to happen? Like, what are the challenges there? Like, what's the lay of the land, sort of, before we dive into this?
Yeah. Um,
It's a big
it's
question. Go
it's a
wherever you
big
want.
question. Yeah, it's complicated. It's an interesting parallel to say that I was like starting to do more and more advocacy work, and then like you have this persona that people make up about you at work, and the two aren't like they're parallels, but they're not
Hmm.
interwoven.
Uh-huh.
And what's interesting is I ran AFI's film festival for several years in Hollywood, and that's how I've worked with so many celebrities.
Mm.
Um,
75 to 80% of them.
yeah, so many red carpet events. Anyway, and just lovely experiences. But I like in that setting, I did not feel like it mattered. So I was way more expressive and open
Uh-huh.
and like out and proud about it.
Mm.
And it really didn't ever affect anything,
Uh-huh.
you know? And but when you're working at studios, like when I was at other studios, it feels like I'm sure many bi people, I mean, we know this, right? We know that bi people like aren't necessarily out at work.
Yeah.
And it's kind of the same thing where you want, it's like you're proud of yourself and you are perfectly happy to be who you are, but you put guardrails on
Yeah.
because you don't know what people's like hangups are
Yeah.
with your identity.
Right.
And so you choose not to make that, you're calculating
Yeah.
basically.
Not make
Because in
that your
this
full identity.
industry, you don't want to get passed up for a promotion. You don't want to get passed up for somebody to want to hire you on their next thing at a different level and all of that,
Yeah.
all of that that goes into what it's like working in our industry.
Right.
You don't want to make that calculated risk
Right.
because you don't want to sacrifice your career.
Yep.
And by the way, shout out to all actors slash celebrities that are dealing with this exact same thing
Yeah.
in terms of coming out. Um, it's I feel like it's the same for me, right? I mean, there are again places that it really didn't matter and people were super supportive. And there are spaces where I am making that calculated decision
Yeah.
to not test that water.
Yeah. I totally get that. And it's also like people may be outwardly supportive, but it can also, there's a risk still,
Yeah,
even when there is outward support of
yeah,
what do people think or how do they then change their attitudes toward you or how they talk to you or what they want to share. Like, I hope things are getting better, but when I was at SVU for 7 years, I didn't realize I was bi for the first few of those,
yeah,
but then I was there when I realized and when I started exploring with men. And the year that I came out was my final year there. And I don't think it's a coincidence that that happened that way, that like I may have come out sooner, but it wasn't a really open
yeah,
environment in that way. Not just biphobic, but everything. It was a little bit like everyone kind of fit into their lane
yeah.
there, or you
Hmm.
risked being seen as something, and you risked being ostracized. And there were definitely no bi people specifically that I knew of, although now I know of multiple who came out after they left the show.
Sure, of course.
So
Yeah,
I
we
think
all do.
none of that's a coincidence. And even when I did tell some people before in the last year that I was there, those people were all very supportive personally.
Hmm.
But I don't know what other people thought. I don't know what my boss thought. I never talked
Yeah,
to him about I never talked to the higher ups about it, and we're dealing with sex and sexuality and storylines about. I don't know. It's a double-edged sword. Part of me wishes
no,
I had
it's
come out
hard.
more and sooner and been able to talk about that
Right, because I
story-wise,
mean,
and part of me is scared
you're
and
pitching stories. I mean, so
yeah,
you're literally making creative, and I've experienced that to a lesser degree, with some writing, producing projects. But I mean, everything you said, which is like you don't really know how people feel. And the other thing that I want to talk about in terms of work is they don't really identify LGBTQ plus people as being like good representations of diversity, right?
uh-huh.
So you're not like,
Yeah,
if you're putting a crew together, people aren't being like, oh, we're going to assume that you may be, um, casting or hiring a certain percentage of LGBTQ plus people to work on this. It's like unless that person is like out and proud or they're a person of color, it doesn't like count in the
factor in.
statistics.
Uh-huh.
And I always make the argument, and I've made this argument with multiple HRs, that you have to force LGBTQ plus people to come out in order to understand that they're representing a certain diversity segment of the population
Right,
on whatever your project is.
right,
And
right.
it's a really, really terrible kind of place to live
Yeah,
because it's really unfair. And it's also unfair that, people of color have to like, that they have to care
yeah,
about them based on the fact that they have a different skin color.
right.
It's awful
And then they have to be the representative
of
and like
that.
of
Yes.
that, and that's
No.
becomes the role and the
Yeah,
job.
and I
Like,
talked about that in my seminar, right? I
yeah,
talked about like in the writers' room, so much of what we've seen in the last like 4 or 5 years during the TV renaissance is
yeah,
the like super diverse one person, like the room of like 10 white straight dudes, and then there's like one
who has everything.
differently able person of color in the LGBTQ plus community who's also like, I don't know,
non-binary, pansexual.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm like, how is this person fulfilling the need for diversity in this thing, like by themselves with their one voice against, the masses? It's unfair.
Right. And that was, I mean, and especially for me coming out around that time, like part of me wishes I could have been a better advocate and I was more out to do that. But this was like the time where I couldn't be more out because I was so scared. And it like right as I was realizing it and starting to say things and pitch storylines, that was when I was like most scared to come out and actually be myself. So it was an important time, but a scary time. And also, one last thing is like, then you also run the risk of being the PC police, which is what a showrunner I worked for called me when I wasn't even out, but I would say things like, maybe this character is bi, not gay, as we're calling him, for example, or other things. Or
and
I would say, don't say the word tranny. And I was called the PC police. And especially if there's that one person fulfilling these diversity roles, that's how they will be looked at often by the straight white man in charge.
Yeah. And I think all of that is always true. And then something else that I sort of became aware of is when I'm when I'm thinking about pitching story ideas about the character that I want to be by, then I'm having my own internalized call biphobia, or just like generally like how I'm representing the community. But you have that conversation with yourself where you're like, is this enough? Is this enough of a bi story? Is this going to represent our community well enough? That kind of a thing. So then, and I'm sure people in the other diversity, places are having the exact same thing where it's like, how does this person represent the entire community? Is it even fair that you write one character because there's one person in the room that's fighting for that character, and then that person ends up representing an entire community? I mean, it doesn't make any sense.
They're speaking from their one person experience to some extent, and it's also like, we'll get into it, but it's like, what does it even mean to represent bi people well? Like, does that mean a positive representation of the person, or does that mean an accurate representation of what they struggle with? And like, I feel like there are many ways to represent us accurately. And then it's like, so what is the most useful? And so that let's go through it.
And on that note, I want to say something that I don't think is in the guide, but I think it's something that I realized in writing the guide, which is, it is basically impossible to stereotype bi people. Like, we have been negative stereotypes as portrayed in the media up to date, right? But I think it's impossible for us to look a certain way and act a certain way such that, as a comparison, the like gay best friend, which is such a stereotype that we've seen countless amount of times now in film and television, right? But like, a straight person looks at that and understands that that's what a gay person is, right? It's not what all gay people are like, but they can associate that with a gay person. And I realized you can't do that to a bi person because we're not wired that way. We're wired to be expansive and more and both and all of those things. And so you can't just say, this is what a bi person looks like.
Well, you go to an AMBI event, you see this incredible diversity. I mean, then when I went to Bi Request in New York, that was a big takeaway at first, was like, oh my God, every age group is represented here. Every race is represented. Every ability and disability. Like, all the gender spectrum and everything.
Exactly.
Like, I couldn't believe how diverse the room was. It was one of the most diverse rooms I had been in my life.
Yeah, and that's every bi space I've ever been in.
And then you go to like the Abbey, the gay pub in WeHo,
and that's still to this day. It's very specific.
You see a lot of the same thing that I enjoy seeing.
Sure,
I'm not saying I don't enjoy.
There's nothing wrong with it, Rob.
Nothing wrong with it.
Live your truth.
To each their own, but it is more, and it's not. It's more monolithic. It's not a monolith, but it's more. Yeah, there's less diversity.
Totally.
Here we go.
Yes.
Bi plus narratives, a guide to authentic representation in storytelling. And look how colorful it is. And look how uncolorful mine was. We won't use that. And how small. See, this is me saving money, printing 4 slides on a page in black and white. And this is Aaron's Disney money. Look, it's colorful. It's a thick piece of paper, but it's double-sided. Disney
It is double-sided. We gotta save. Hey, we're eco-friendly.
Okay. All right. Okay. It's not all about money. It's about saving the planet. Okay. So what is Rewrite the Byline and Still Bisexual? Like, how did you get involved with this before we get into it?
Oh yeah. So as you know, because I think you went to both, or at least one of them. Anyway, I
attended
pitched
virtually at least.
Yeah. I pitched a seminar to Ambi in early 2023, and all I really wanted to do is, for the last several years that you and I have been going to all these fun events and, hanging out with all these cool bi people in different spaces, everybody was always talking about like what they were watching. Cause that's, by the way, a natural thing. Straight people do it. Anybody does it. Right.
Yeah.
And I, for my own, for my own self, wanted to like better throw out ideas because people kept being like, oh, well, you work in the industry. So like, what should I be watching?
Yeah.
And I realized I didn't have an answer.
Uh-huh.
And so again, taking responsibility, I chose to like start watching as much stuff that people in various blogs and articles and all these, listicles and all the other stuff had reported as being like bi representation. And so I went down that rabbit hole, and then I really wanted to talk about it in a setting like Ambi with just bi people to both inform them what the industry's like investment and like what that experience and where we were as an industry and how that played into what was on the screen. And then I wanted to talk about what I had seen, what I, what we were seeing, what the stereotypes are. Well, and a lot of those conversations just sort of melded into what would eventually become this, but started as a seminar where I was like, I think there are at least 10 terrible representations of us as a community. And also, I picked like a couple of like good shows essentially for that seminar, but it evolved. So even the second time I did the seminar via Zoom for a more international audience in early March of this year, I like evolved it and I made it into more because I really wanted to stay with the bi joy of it, and I wanted to focus on the few good representations or maybe more like what was possible for people. And again, going back to my personal story, I'm still waiting, but I really want to see a character that feels like me.
Yeah.
Just like I want everyone to have that experience, but especially in our community because we're so erased in everyday society.
Yeah.
So, and that's, by the way, we were talking about earlier, the social insidious nature of biphobia and bi erasure is that everything about our society, really since like the 40s and 50s especially, has been like purposefully, insidiously, like planned to erase us as a community.
Yeah.
So who your partner is dictates whether you're straight or gay. The fact that when people think about a human being, their default is to think of straight or gay. Like all of those binaries is all interwoven to how we just have never existed in the first place. So the fact that we don't have representation doubles down on it.
Yeah.
Because the invisibility is what I think was particularly damaging to me as a child because I just didn't know what was happening to me. I didn't understand what bi was. And again, I didn't hear the word till I was 19.
Yeah.
So all that to being said, I want to change that. I believe that it can be changed, first and foremost.
Yeah.
I believe it should be changed. And given where I am, who I am in my career, I felt like if no one else is going to do this, then I will. And essentially, Christina, who's the owner and founder of Rewrite the Byline, she's amazing. She approached me after the Ambi seminar that I did in 2023 and said, I would really like to make this like a real thing.
Yeah.
And so she and I, So she and I got together, and I continued to dive even deeper and watch even more representation or supposed representation of our community, and just kept going. And interestingly, um, going from, spending like maybe 2 years watching stuff, and then Christina approached me and said, "Hey, let's put this in a real thing." I then watched even more stuff, and a lot of that had to do with, it was the end of the year, so a lot of the Oscar race stuff was happening as well. Well, it turns out there was a bunch of terrible representation in the Oscars last year, and still great movies, by the way. But it was like it reaffirmed what Christine and I were doing was valid and important, and anyway, so we started the journey.
In the Oscar
There's
movies
just
for some
always,
reason.
yeah,
All the
and still
interesting
called gay.
biopics are about bi men.
I mean, talk about like sometimes when you're advocating for something, you wonder if people care, or you wonder if it really matters, or there's even like, in my opinion, with bi people, we have been taught, I don't know by whom, to settle, in my experience watching our community, to settle for like the lowest common denominator of representation and what I feel we really deserve. And again, that's one of the reasons I'm doing this podcast with you. We deserve more. I can't say that enough. So much more. There are thousands of examples of gay people in film and television now. Trans people have had their own shows that were show run by trans people. We are struggling with the small, like, little bites of stuff that we have. And the reason I say that is I, over the course of literally just Christine and I deciding to write this thing, which was a 6 to 7 month process to get it right, little things would continue to come up. Like, just as an example, in February, there was an article posted on Variety that was like top whatever, like 50 romance films of all time or something. And Call Me By Your Name was on that. And it was referred to as a gay love story. If you've seen the movie, they are clearly not gay.
Very bisexual movie.
Very bisexual movie.
Yes,
thank you. Which is why it exists in one of the categories here. But it was like reaffirming that like Variety was still having the conversation that that's still a gay film, which is not. And so it just reaffirmed that what we're doing was important and right. And so that's the stuff that fuels me.
I totally agree. Like, as much as there is some progress that's visible lately, like when you look at the statistics that we'll get into, it's still very small. And that was me growing up, was like, I saw a ton of gay representation and it didn't feel like me. Like, I got it, I accepted it, I enjoyed it. I have always been like an ally, but I was like, oh, well, that's not me. So therefore I'm straight because I'm not gay. And I didn't see any bi representation, never heard the word on TV or in a movie, maybe here and there, but not the word.
No.
I never saw a real sexual fluidity that was like embraced or celebrated. And that's part of it. And I remember like why I didn't come out. And I remember hearing Stephanie Beatrice on Brooklyn Nine-Nine say the word.
Multiple times.
That wasn't the first bi person I had seen, but that was maybe the first time on like a network comedy that I heard the word. And I cried hearing that. And there are other examples of like the first time a character was bi that just really resonated with me in a deep way. Like even Game of Thrones, which is like kind of dumb, but also felt really meaningful to me at that moment when that came out.
No, and I remember seeing Stephanie on a panel talking about how the writers actually brought her in the room to write the coming out scene. And when she got the script, she was so touched that she started to cry when she first read it, because they said the word bi like 4 or 5 times in like a page and a half scene. And that was so meaningful to her. And then it was meaningful to you. And that's the kind of stuff that we're talking about, right? Is like bringing us into the conversation.
If you make it authentic from the beginning, from inception of the story, then it will work better than when you just use it as a plot device and the people writing it are not bi. We'll get into that. Okay.
We will.
We've been saying we'll get into it, so let's get into
let's get into
this may be part 2, our season finale. Welcome back. If that is indeed the split point, welcome back. I'm still here with Aaron Hammersley. He authored the Guide to Authentic Representation in Storytelling for Bi Plus Narratives. So we got this quote here: "Bisexuality doesn't mean halfway between gay and straight. It is its own identity." Evan Rachel Wood said that. She's bi?
My bi hero.
Oh, I feel like
She's
I knew
so
she was
bi.
bi.
Yeah, she's one of those few celebrities, and this is again part of our industry and like how we live in. She like is never asked about her sexuality because she traditionally has been in straight appearing relationships, but she has always been out and proud about it.
Cool.
But they even like erase, yeah, like people don't care. Like they won't talk to her about it. They won't interview her about it. It's, you know, but I mean, I think my friend and I always joke that she's always like, "Did you know I'm bi? I'm bi, by the way. Did you know I'm bi?" Like, you know.
I love it. That's the bi thing, is to be like always telling people.
Yeah.
So that's interesting that LGBT inclusive movies earn more revenue at the box office, 29% more, which makes sense.
Oh yeah,
because we're a growing segment of the population,
and we also largely have disposable incomes, and traditionally invest in things that we see ourselves in or we see as productive for ourselves.
Makes sense.
This is a cool slide too, just because it's in the slide and not the actual analytics, but Disney asked for this actually because what they wanted is they wanted a clear indication of what the industry was missing and the potential of our community to elevate, expand, profitize things.
Well,
as they were made,
is it like, oh, if we can see the market for this, that's more attractive to people at the
it will
big
definitely
studios.
Yeah, it's definitely like that's kind of what it is. It's a hey, this is the money you're missing out of, you know.
Right.
And it came as like a as an example of like how Marvel did Black Panther, and that was a huge movie, so much money, and it was like this is what white people in the industry have never seen before, which is that like there's a whole segment of society that wants to support good things that represent them. Yeah. And they did.
Right. So, capitalism is not the best thing in the world, but if we're using it for inclusivity,
correct,
then at least it has some good purpose to it.
Yeah.
And also because, as it says here, 1 in 10 Gen Z identifies bi. I mean, and bi is growing more and more among young people to such a degree. Like whatever's younger than Gen Z is like more bi.
Right. Do we even get to talk? You and I have these like favorite statistics conversations.
Oh yeah. Well, I was going to ask also, because you say 60% of LGBT plus adults identify as bi. I thought it was 57%. This says 62.
These are the closest new statistics that we have. Yeah.
Okay. I like that.
Yeah. It's growing. Well, and like we were talking a couple weeks ago, like I think, I didn't look this up, but I think it's the first U.S. census that has sexuality on it.
Oh, yeah.
And allows you to identify as bi on that sexuality. So that's exciting. And I think
we have those results. We have
I guess we will at some point, right? Because the census has to be published publicly.
I think so. Is it not already? It's 2024.
But it'll be interesting because
we should look that up.
I think one of the things that I always say too when I am pitching to studios or when I'm talking about bi experience needing to be seen is that we don't actually know the real numbers. We just know that they're more than what we have.
Yeah.
But we have no idea how much more, right?
Yeah.
But there's some fluidity to the fact that, like, I don't know, whatever that statistic is you gave me, that's like 80% of all bi men are in like married men are in relationships with women, so it looks like a straight relationship, even though all of those people are bi. Right. I mean, how many people in our society who've been persecuted for whatever reason don't want to come out of the closet as bi? Then you have an entire segment of society that's not identifying on paper as this thing, so we can't say that those people are in the community, but like we know that they're
there somewhere.
They're there somewhere. Right. We just have no idea how many there are because they're unwilling and they don't feel safe coming out.
Right. And well, we know that like bi people are the least likely to be out. Among bi women, it's in the 20% range, 20 something, and among bi men, it's like 12 to 15%
Yeah, it's
are out.
awful. Yeah.
And that's people who, on some level in their mind, identify as bi, but are not out. And as we know from
Yeah.
both of our stories, how many more people are there who may be sexually fluid, but aren't even at the awareness stage
Yeah.
yet, or are doing the thing where they've noticed it, but it's not important.
Yeah.
It's not part of their identity. They're married, they're happily married, monogamous, and they're not thinking about that
Yeah.
much. But had they grown up at a different time in a different place, maybe that would be part
Yeah.
of their identity, even if they end up in the monogamous relationship. Like, so there's a lot more potential there than the numbers will ever show, I think. But among young people, it is becoming more accepted, and therefore you're seeing it more. And so it'll hopefully trickle up. And then this is just interesting. It's like you have this statistic from 2014 to 2022. There were only 55 bi speaking characters out of 38,000 speaking characters in top grossing movies, which amounts to 0.14% of speaking characters. So I'm sure there's a lot of speaking characters whose sexuality is not identified at all.
Correct.
But still, that's very small.
Yeah.
0.14%.
Yeah.
We can do better than that. Let's keep going. What else is in here? We talked about this. We talked about who we are. We talked about all this stuff. Bi, pan, queer. I'm done with the label wars, so I'm done with that. It's all the same. Bi, pan, queer is all valid. It's all great. It's
whatever your particular identity is, it's all under the lovely bi umbrella. We all love each other.
So what do you want to do first? Your recommendations, or go through some examples? Let's do the recommendations first. Let's do the broad stuff. Okay. I mean, I want to talk about these shows too.
No, we should.
But, okay, so your main recommendation is my favorite one, and it's one we just kind of mentioned. But it's like not just about what ends up on screen. It's about who's in the writer's room and who's consulting at the story level. We need to hire more bi people in writers' rooms.
And we need to create space where they can. Yes, we specifically need to hire Rob. I would like to sell some stuff too, but I think we're at the place right now where we have to equalize the people in the room. So while I think largely that it is possible for somebody who is straight to tell a very good bi story in a TV show or a film, I would rather this moment in time hire more people like us to tell our own authentic stories so that
yeah. And how do you balance that with like focusing on what the show is about? Does that make sense? Where it's like, okay, Brooklyn Nine-Nine is the example here, but let's say you have a show that's not about sexuality, but there are people exploring sex and sexuality and like relationships and dating. Like, what do you say to the showrunner who is doing a medical drama and he's deciding between he's deciding who to hire and wants experts on the subject, but also there's maybe bi characters and wants to incorporate authenticity on that too? Like, how do you think about the makeup of a room? That's a tough
Maybe
question.
This doesn't answer your question, but here's how I'd like to answer your question.
Okay.
I believe that having a bi person in the room that can hold more than one thing true at the same time, which, by the way, I think is the most beautiful thing about bi people. I think having a writer in the room will naturally elevate your other characters in multiple ways. And then when you want to have bi characters in the room, they're also going to be able to do that for you, but in a way that because they have been supported and have been allowed to influence the stories of other characters in the show, they're respected when they want to tell a bi story.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. Well, and it touches on something very true for me, and I think for a lot of bi people, is like the experience we've had in our lives of being bi gives us maybe not everyone, it affects different people differently, but for me, and I think many people I've met, it gives you like an ability to hold lots of points of view at the same time, to reconcile conflicting ideas in a really complex, interesting way. And you end up writing less stuff that's like arch enemy versus pure
Yeah.
good hero. You write the more
Yeah.
complicated, real shit. And so,
Yeah.
like, I think if that's the tone of a show you're going for, a bi point of view helps you regardless of sexuality. It
Yeah.
helps you think about those kind of
No,
concepts.
I think that we're great as people who have felt marginalized in writing complexities into characters, right? Like,
Right.
I believe that we should have bi villains, and I say that knowing that I wrote about how terrible it is that we're represented that way, I but also bi heroes, and we've had so few bi heroes that
Mhm.
like everything I feel like has to be in balance. And again, like us, to your point, being able to hold that complexity is elevating everybody.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then we have bi heroes like Oberyn Martell, and he gets his eyes
Oh
squished
my
out
god.
in a
Yeah.
horrible
We'll
death.
get to that. It's in the guide too. I really feel there were very few places we were unwilling to go with this guide. In fact, I think at one point Christina and I had to have a conversation where we had to be like, we have to really speak in the both and, because for me, some of the section that's on misrepresentations was coming from a place of we deserve better as a community. And
uh,
so I was willing to be the bad guy
uh,
and call people out. And after Christine and I had a conversation, we did soften some of the things, because I want people to know that anytime they see themselves in a character, whether we think it's bad representation or not, it is valid.
yeah.
And I think
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
important. And there are great shows and films that I reference in the case studies that I actually love. In fact, quite a lot of them are shows and movies that I love.
Yeah.
And also, I hate the bi
Yeah.
representation in them.
Yeah.
So again, as a bi person, I'm holding more than one thing true at the same time.
Yes.
But straight
Makes
people
sense.
have a harder time with that.
Yes.
So we kind of had to warm them up in some
Yeah.
ways in the way that we wrote it.
Well, speaking of, this is a great example of that, Fleabag, which I think
Oh,
is
yeah.
like an incredible show.
It's an incredible
Love
show.
Fleabag.
And I still would love to have been a fly on the wall when they pitched that show. Like, it's a show that's kind of about
What is it?
nothing and
yet it's
also just a
perfect.
person. Like,
Yeah.
and the show is such a lovely little 2-season stint. It's
Yeah.
great.
Well, it's a show that shows that like authenticity and originality and like just really being yourself is
Yeah.
interesting, is fascinating. I mean, the character alone is interesting. And so I love that show. And your recommendation overall, and this is an example of it, is if the audience doesn't know if a character is bi, then we're not really changing the narrative for bi people. And so
Yeah.
your recommendation is just say bi.
Yeah.
Say the word. And so as amazing as Fleabag was and bisexual as it may have been, they didn't use that word. And so what's the,
to be clear, there are
drawback?
countless. Countless.
It's not just the one
No.
that's right here. There are so many like that.
It goes back to what I said about stereotyping too, right? Like, it was easier for people outside of the community to understand what a gay person looked like, because in the beginning, they did a lot of coming out stories where they very, very clearly said that they were gay. They made a thing about it. They were sensitive to that character's experience coming out as bi, right?
Yeah.
Even Will and Grace like reinforces that the characters are gay in basically every single episode. Like, they are dating somebody new, and it's always a guy. Like, there's that.
The woman comes up.
It's exactly. Yeah. And that show also dealt with their work life and all these other things, but it was something that was ingrained in the characters from the beginning. It was something, I want to use the word obvious to anyone who was watching the show. And we as bi people have been robbed of that.
Yeah.
Sorry, Rob.
It's okay.
Basically the entire history of film and television, as far as I can tell.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, yeah, only very recently have I seen shows that I feel like that character is explicitly and consistently bi.
Yeah.
And it's part of it.
Yeah.
But only I can count them on my hand, I feel like.
Yeah. I think that's probably true. And even in that circumstance, it depends on how much you think it has staying power for a non-bi person as the show moves on, or as like they're not saying the word as constantly.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, it also makes me think of like why people write stuff and don't use the word bi. And whether whether it's in them or whether it's what they think viewers will imagine. It's like, I think a lot more people have had these kind of experiences with fluidity.
Mm-hmm.
There are more of those people than there are people who use the word bi for themselves.
Yeah.
And so if you are in that group, or if you know a lot of people in that group who maybe get fluidity but aren't ready for the word bi for themselves, then it kind of makes sense that you would gravitate toward that, of just like showing fluid people without having them name it. And that then reinforces the exact invisibility that it's based on. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy.
And this doesn't, by the way, have anything, in my opinion, to do with the label wars, because to me, it's not about the label. You could still identify somebody as having a bi experience and wanting to have bi experiences without having to have them self-label. But you're still using the word bi because we're trying to do what, in my opinion, still hasn't been done, which is destigmatize the word.
That's exactly what came
We're
to my
not
mind.
there. We're not there.
Yeah.
We should be there, but we're not.
Right.
You know?
Right. And that, whether, exactly, it's, if there's some aversion for the character to not use that label, fine. Do things from a character point of view. That's good writing, is like, what would this real character do in this situation, in this time and place? So that makes sense. But as a writer, you do want to think about, like, what are you contributing to invisibility, or are we destigmatizing? And there are ways to destigmatize even while portraying a character who is afraid of stigma.
Yeah.
You can do both.
Yeah, you can hold space for both.
Yeah.
I always use the example, we have been able to do these things for other identities of humans.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
But we have chosen actively as a society to not do that for bi people. And in my opinion, that's wrong.
Why do you think that choice is made differently? Is it like less, does it just seem like it's less important to people? Or
I think it comes down to the narratives, right? I mean, as a society, we're still very attached to binaries. You know, a lot of religious, takeover in the last 250 years historically has shifted all of humanity away from more fluid experiences of relationships into like this very stoic, straight or not straight. And I think when the gay community was fighting for its rights, which, side note, was started by bi people, they contributed to the conversation by what they considered to be not muddying the waters, which is going straight or gay, right? And not holding space for bi or trans people or people who are gender fluid,
Right. Yeah. For reasons that are understandable, but hurt us. The next sort of recommendation you have: expand opportunities and empower new voices. And I think relatedly, intersectionality not only matters, but it is crucial to bi storytelling. So why explain that? Why is this important?
Yeah. So I have said before, but no two bi people are alike in every way.
Yeah.
And I think we're past the point where we have to tell like gay, affluent, or sorry, not gay, but like, I don't think we need like a character who's like white and from a middle class home that is, bi. Like, you can do that, but what I'm saying is, I think as a society we have learned that like there's space for people who look different, who are different ethnicities, who have different backgrounds, and it doesn't mean that you can't do both, and we should do both. Because capturing a more full experience from the get-go, as opposed to sort of whitewashing the bi experience in order to get where like gay has gotten in our society, I feel is unnecessary. I think that we know better now as an industry, and so I feel that intersectionality should be inherent to us moving forward.
Yeah, makes sense. Two Bi Guys by One Bi Guy is produced and edited by me, Robert Brooks Cohen, and it was created by me and Alex Boyd. Our new logo art is by Caitlin Weinman. Our music is by Ross Mincer. To help support this podcast, visit patreon.com/Robert Brooks Cohen. You'll get full video episodes, early access, and bonus content. Visit robertbrookscohen.com to learn more about my coaching, my book, and my stand-up comedy. And thanks for listening to Two Bi Guys by One Bi Guy.